Hey everyone, welcome. This is Shereem Herndon-Brown, Strategic Admissions Advice, and I'm so happy today to be joined by Amy Bryant of Bryant College Coaching. We're going to talk about the future of college athletics recruiting and the impact of COVID-19. So much going on in our world, and how that impacts high school athletes and potentially college athletes is so in flux. But I'm glad that we have Amy here, who's a college coach and expert on this, to bring some clarity to this. I'm going to take you through a few quick slides about me and what I do and why I wanted to collaborate with Amy, but I'm really going to turn the keys over to her because she's the expert and I'm not. Amy, say hi.
Hi. Thanks for having me, Shereem.
No worries, no worries. First things first, I am Shereem Herndon-Brown. I've been in this college counseling profession for a long time, and I'm the president and founder of Strategic Admissions Advice. We help families to navigate the college admissions process, as well as help parents to help their kids to find the right college major, find the right career, and ideally the right school for all that to happen. Again, been doing this for over 20 years. I visited over 500 colleges. I actually counted a few years ago how many schools I visited in my entire life, from being a college prospective college student to throughout my college years, and then also as a professional. And I feel like I have a good grasp on how schools work. So I'm happy to do what I do and share what I know with families. And through that, by being a working for Georgetown University, by being a school counselor at two schools and leading this company for several years, I feel like I know a little bit about school. So what I didn't know a lot about, although I've had a few athletes in my life, what I didn't know a lot about was how the athletic recruitment process works. So I was immediately attracted to Amy and what she knew because I'm a dad. And as a dad, I have a son who's now 15 years old and a high school baseball player and a recruited athlete. And thankfully, he's signed or verbally committed to the University of North Carolina, and I'm thrilled for him. And I'm glad he feels good about himself. But Amy, you do this all the time with a lot of families, and you know much more than I do. So you kind of touched my dad part um, as we had conversations, because this was all new territory for me, and I'm glad that we navigated it well. But I want to make sure that people know that this process is something that needs a lot of attention early on, as well as we go into this COVID-19 coronavirus era and the impact of it all, that they have the information that they need in order to help their children get to the next level of athletics collegiately. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to Amy, and I'm going to listen intently as a dad. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so Amy can share hers and let it go from there. Amy, on you.
Gotcha. Just give me one sec here. There we go. All right. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Awesome. All right. So thanks for the great introduction, Shereem, and thanks for sharing your personal story as well. Definitely can see how you'd be a very proud dad right now. But it's also a very uncertain time for all parents of student athletes. So let's take a look at why. First of all, here's a little bit of information about me. I've coached for 20 years at Emory University, but I also have an extensive network across all sports and all divisions. I've coached 6 national championship teams, 10 national championship individuals, All-Americans, and most importantly, I've mentored many student athletes to go on to have very successful careers across many industries. I was also a 2-sport college athlete, and most importantly, I'm a proud mother myself of 2 soccer, tennis, and basketball playing student athletes. Here's an overview of what we're going to talk about today. We'll discuss the impact of the pandemic on in-season collegiate student athletes and what restored eligibility means. We'll talk about the unknowns of college career extensions, that 5th year. What does that really mean? We'll talk about the long-term impact on spring sport teams and some possible big picture trends. And then the impact on 2020 committed recruits and the new recruiting process because of this pandemic. And lastly, what high school student athletes can do right now to get recruited. So first, I want to provide a little perspective on the events of the last 2 weeks and the impact of this pandemic on in-season college athletes. As a current college coach, I can personally attest to the roller coaster of emotions felt by all the people involved with winter and spring sports, especially the players. Winter sports were either in their championship or about to go to their championship. It's really hard to imagine training your entire season, being ready to put it all on the line, and then having everything canceled at the last minute. Literally, for some sports, there were basketball teams mid-game when the announcement came to cancel. My team was on spring break a little over a week ago. You can see a picture of us here. We were following all the announcements in the news with fearful anticipation. First, some of our competitors canceled matches involving travel. Then our school was canceled. Then the NCAA canceled all championships. Then the NCAA restored all eligibility for spring sports, which we'll get into what that means in a second. And then we traveled back to Emory for the student athletes to pack up and go home, all within a period of 2 weeks. Essentially, our way of life as collegiate coaches and student athletes has really been flipped upside down. So here are the facts. Winter sports championships have been canceled. Some sports were mid-championship when the announcement came down. Others were just about to start. Again, the emotions these athletes must have felt are really unfathomable to me. All spring sports seasons were canceled, eligibility restored. And then the NCAA has instituted a moratorium on all in-person recruiting for Divisions 1 and 2. And Division 3, most conferences are forbidding in-person recruiting. So it's not come from the NCAA level, but it's happening at the conference level. And in NAI and JUCO, I should mention, there's also no moratorium in place. So here are all the sports that were canceled for the remainder of their seasons, and this is across all divisions and all associations. And so let's examine the blanket waivers issued to Division 1, 2, 3, NAI, and JUCO because they're all a little bit different. So I'm not going to read these, but you can see that in Division 1, they've said eligibility relief is appropriate, but the details will be finalized at a later time. In Division 2, they have allowed institutions to self-apply season of competition waivers, and they've also waived scholarship money, so student athletes can receive athletic aid just for the 2020-21 academic year. So that doesn't impact their scholarship amounts, their maximums that they can have, just for 1 year though. In Division 3, waive the use of a season of participation. In NAIA, no spring sport will be charged a season. And then in JUCO, this is what we call in the profession the student athlete clock. So Division 1 has a 5-year continuous clock. So from the second you enroll as a full-time student, your clock is ticking. You cannot take a semester off, and you only have to complete a certain percentage of degree requirement coursework in your first 4 years. D2 and D3 are a little different in that they have a 10-semester or 15-quarter clock that doesn't run continuously. So you could take a semester off of playing, which is important to note as we examine the cost of staying a 5th year. But the sticking point is that you have to take courses towards your degree the entire time you're a student athlete. I don't want to focus too much on NAI or JUCO from here on out, but you'll see that NAI is very similar to D2 and D3 in requirements, and JUCO has a pretty simple clock. So hearing out all of this about the waivers and the eligibility and the academic requirements, your head might be spinning. There's a lot of questions out there. Inside Higher Ed published a great article pointing out many of those questions, which I encourage you to read. And after the webinar, I can send out the link for that. But here are the biggest unknowns. Can current spring sports seniors make plans to stay for a 5th year this late in the game? current seniors may have jobs already lined up that can't be postponed at this late date. So it's probably less of an option for them to stay for a 5th year, even if scholarships are extended to them. Also, most grad school deadlines have passed, so attending graduate school is not really an option at this late time, or deciding to do it's not an option at this time. If they had already planned grad school, seniors are eligible to play at whatever institution they were planning to attend. Just a word about scholarships for current seniors. D2 has already granted a waiver, as I mentioned before, to allow more financial aid scholarships to cover this next year of 5th year student athletes. So I expect we'll see more D2 current seniors, stay for a 5th year. D1 will be meeting in April next month to discuss scholarship extension. So we'll have a little more of an idea about current seniors staying for a 5th year when they make a ruling. The next unknown is how many current spring sport freshmen, sophomores, and juniors will actually decide to play a 5th year. If my Division III team is any indication, lots of them. On my team, 11 out of the 12 of the freshmen, sophomores, and juniors have already expressed a sincere desire to play a 5th year. The one outlier is a nursing student and has to follow a strict progression that wouldn't count as degree coursework. As I mentioned earlier, and we'll explore in more detail, in order to be academically eligible in Division III, you're required to take courses towards 1 degree. In Division I, you only need to be making progress towards a degree until your 4th year. In your 5th year, you can take classes for a minor or a certification. So to summarize, as long as roster size limitations and scholarships are expanded for 4 years of athletes in D1 and D2, I would expect more current freshmen, sophomores, and juniors to stay for a 5th year in these divisions as well. Next question, can all those with restored eligibility afford to play a 5th year? So this question certainly becomes a question of privilege. Whoever can pay to stay or whoever has a scholarship to stay, let's examine the expenses. A full year of living expenses, there are tuition expenses, there's an opportunity cost of delaying a year to enter the workforce. At Division III schools, there's no athletic scholarship, so in order to stay, student athletes will have to figure out the most cost-effective way to afford the 5th year, considering the high cost of tuition. I'll explain some options in a minute. But in regards to scholarship schools, and as I mentioned before, Division II has only waived the expansion of scholarships for 1 year for current seniors. So we don't know how current freshmen, sophomores, and juniors will afford to stay for a 5th year. And in Division I, there's even more of a question mark until those meetings next month. As things stand now, any 5th player in Division I or any current freshman, sophomore, or junior in Division II either has to already be on a 4.5 or 5 year redshirting scholarship, or the student athlete has to pay out of pocket for the 5th year, or the coach has to reallocate money from a graduated student athlete scholarship to cover the 5th year. These types of reallocations are highly regulated by the NCAA. I think I saw a question pop up. Let me check it out. I'm not able to get that, I don't think. So,
Amy, I'm going to answer the question for the person, but we'll answer them at the end. I'm taking them all down. Thank you so much for your questions, and I'm going to have them all down. So thank you so much. Keep asking them in the chat. Appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, so will teams be able to expand their roster size scholarship pool to accommodate additional 5th year players for 4 full years? So this is the $1 million question in Division I. Discussions at the NCAA are expected next month, and we just won't know more until then. But as it stands now, teams have a roster limit and scholarship maximum that they have to adhere to. Most coaches already have plans to fill these spots and scholarships with their current incoming freshmen. This doesn't leave much room for current seniors to stay for a 5th year. But if things change at those meetings regarding roster size and scholarship amounts starting this upcoming year, we will most likely see teams getting bigger and more scholarship money being pumped into teams if schools have the money to pump in. We'll talk about privileged programs later on. In Division II, as I mentioned before, there's no roster maximums, and the NCAA has already waived maximums, waived the scholarship maximums for 1 year. The unknown is whether or not the NCAA will waive scholarship maximums for another 3 years. And even though scholarships maximums have been waived, this is permissive, not prescriptive, meaning schools don't have to provide money to cover those scholarships. In Division III, we don't have roster maximums set by the NCAA either, unless they're set by the institution or conference. And obviously, we don't have scholarships, so taking extra players for an additional year is mainly up to a coach's discretion. So, how is it possible for student athletes to stay a 5th year at their current institution in light of the integration of eligibility and academic requirements? For Division I, current seniors not already on a 5-year plan need to check with their coach regarding roster size and scholarship availability. Current freshmen, sophomores, and juniors need to talk to their coach now about taking that 5th year and plan their academics and finances accordingly. Their 5th year coursework could include classes towards a minor, a degree, a certification, or graduate work. 5th year students must play the entire year, both semesters, but the final semester could include less credit hours. I'm going to skip Division II here since we have a scholarship blanket waiver for 1 year. We have a little breathing room to figure things out for later 5th years. But here in Division III, how can student athletes stay for 5th year? This is where things get really complicated, primarily because of the strict academic requirement stating student athletes have to complete work towards 1 degree. And then, of course, there are no athletic scholarships, so one must figure out how to lessen the blow of the cost of a 5th year. Seniors have the most immediate action required. The options: number 1, they either have to start graduate school at their current institution, which I hope they've already applied because, like I said earlier, most application dates have passed. Or number 2, they can continue undergraduate work by dropping at least 1 course towards their degree requirement right now and save it for spring of their 5th year. Then in the fall of their 5th year, they would take no classes and therefore pay no tuition and sit out of their sport, which means no official practice, no competitions. Then they can come back in the spring of their 5th year to take that 1 class that's still left for their degree. And hopefully their institution allows payment by credit hour in the final semester instead of full tuition. Many do. Freshmen, sophomores, and juniors have a little more time to plan. They can plan to stay for a full undergraduate 5th year, taking a minimum of 12 credit hours in the fall and fewer in the spring, ensuring that they are still taking degree requirements each semester, and they can play both semesters as well. Or do what a current senior would do: take no classes in the fall, take 1 class in the spring that meets degree requirement to significantly lessen their costs. They could also plan to attend graduate school at their current institution. So, phew, that is a lot of compliance jargon. So let's take a look at a concept that's often overlooked, but is much simpler to comprehend: team culture. First, I believe there will be a significant shift in team dynamics for spring teams if more players stay for a 5th year. First of all, a 5-year spread of players is a huge gap in age. Today, my seniors will comment on how young our new freshmen seem when they first arrive. 1 more year there, age 23, 24 to age 17, 18, it's a pretty wide gap in maturity. Secondly, coaches will have more options when it comes to choosing to play an experienced player over a freshman. And experience is truly a competitive advantage when it comes to important, stressful situations and competitions. Experienced players are wiser and they appreciate every last opportunity, especially those returning from the experience of having this year canceled. I already look to play my upperclassmen more in big competitions, and now I'll almost certainly give them the nod more frequently. With a whole extra year of upperclassmen at the choosing, incoming freshmen will inevitably receive less playing time. They'll have to overcome the feelings associated with that, which can cause a whole slew of challenges for the entire team that 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago didn't exist to such a degree. Let's take a look at some other trends that we might see as a result of all these changes. If student athletes from these 4 classes across all divisions are allowed and decide to stay a 5th year, We could see a lot less student athletes choosing to play sports in college because there's simply less playing time available. Nobody wants to go to college and sit on the bench, especially when there's the potential to ride the pine for more than a year. Trend 2, talented athletes may be forced to reconsider their options as the Division I and II teams they hope to play for may no longer have a spot or playing time available for them. They will be forced to examine options across all divisions to find the playing time they feel they deserve. This could greatly increase the depth of competitive teams in Division III, as we could see a migration of D1 and D2 athletes trading bench time for playing time. Similarly, more student athletes could choose to play junior and community college sports for a couple years to provide a 2-year time buffer while waiting out the increased roster sizes at 4-year programs. Trend 4, I mentioned before that 5th years could stay and play at their current institution's team by attending graduate school at that institution. But 5th years with remaining eligibility have always had the option to finish their careers at a different graduate institution. We will likely see an increase in the amount of players who choose to do this because 4 years of spring sport athletes now have an extra year of eligibility to work with. As a coach, I wonder about the impact this could have on team dynamics. Having a player who spent 4 years on another team with another coach suddenly join your program for 1 year as the oldest player in the bunch is certainly a unique wrench to throw into a pre-established team culture. Trend 5, we could also see more high school student athletes deciding to take a gap year or repeating a year of school. There are different rules surrounding this depending on division that would take too long to explore, and I really want to share some recruiting tips with you. But generally speaking, if a student athlete takes a gap year and maintains amateur status during that time, they could start school and their clock after that gap year. Keep in mind, some sports only have a 6-month grace period for gap years. The other option would be repeating 8th grade or a year of high school. Again, there's some rules to be followed based on when core classes have to be completed with your old graduating class versus your new graduating class, but this is an option as well. And then trend 6, a last trend is that the rich athletic programs get richer while the poor programs get poorer. Division II has already allowed for scholarship enhancements for 1 year. Even if Division I elects to do the same thing while also expanding their roster size, there is no guarantee that each respective program will have the money to support additional student athletes. The key here is that these expansions are permissive, not prescriptive. As such, this quickly becomes a situation of privilege, as those programs that can afford to will be able to keep their 5th-year players while still recruiting new ones. This leaves the poor programs to fend for themselves with small rosters and even smaller budgets. And with the NCAA announcement 3 days ago that payments to universities will be slashed by 2/3 as a result of the lost March Madness revenue, this is pushing a lot of schools into the poorer category. So let's take a quick poll here. Shereem, were you able to do a poll?
I can, but I actually don't want to mess it up. I'm gonna have people
Okay.
raise their hands but that's a great question, Amy. Why don't we do this? If you have a student in the class of a high school student in the class of 2021, 2020, excuse me, a graduating senior, or someone in the class of 2021, a junior, 2022, a sophomore, 2023, please just type it in the Q&A. Just type in what year, and at the end we'll be able to address each year individually. But so I just don't want to technically throw anything off. Amy, you're doing such a great job. Forgive my technophobia, but yes, we want to know exactly what years you're coming from so that we can address your questions appropriately.
Right. All right. So for those 2020 committed spring sport athletes, these are the incoming freshmen. Here is what you should do right now. Number 1, do not panic. If the student athlete signed a national letter of intent, the scholarship is intact and must be honored. In D3, there are not roster maximums, so the student athlete theoretically still has a spot. It just may be a spot on a larger team. Number 2, I highly recommend that the student athlete talks to the coach as soon as possible. They should find out the plans of current players regarding a fifth year. The student athlete might not even need to worry about playing time if there's no seniors returning for a fifth year. If there have been adjustments to the roster, the student athlete needs to find out where the coach now sees the student athlete fitting into their program. And Division I and Division II commits, is redshirting something worth considering? This is another conversation worthy of having with the coach. Number 3, I suggest that the student athlete examines why he or she picked this program in the first place. If those reasons are still intact, then the student athlete should go for it with an open mind. It may turn out that with some new fifth year players, the student athlete might wind up learning more than they initially would have. If those reasons are no longer intact, the student athlete might want to explore their options. Unfortunately, the options are not great at this late time, and withdrawing a commitment is really never a great avenue to pursue and not something that I can recommend, but it is an option. Let's take a look at the impact of coronavirus on our current high school freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. Right now, because of the recruiting moratorium, there are no spring official or unofficial campus visits, as we all know, which also means that there's no competitions or practices to observe. Student athletes aren't going to get the opportunity to see the team in action and see if that matches what they're looking for. There's currently no opportunities for student athletes to showcase their skills. As we know, everything's been canceled. So the coaches aren't going to have an opportunity to see student athletes in person in competition. ACT, SAT prep courses and tests have been postponed. Everything's been delayed. So this really is going to slow that early recruiting train for everybody. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And then the other impact, which you've heard me mention a lot, is the less opportunities for playing time on all spring sport teams for the next 4 years. So 2021, 22, and 23s really need to reevaluate their list of schools that they're considering. And here is what prospective student athletes in those 3 classes can do now. And there's lots. First off, like I said, student athletes are going to want to research team rosters, figure out what year the players who are getting the most playing time are in, and this is going to be something that could, as I said, significantly impact freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, because the best college players may decide to play that 5th year. They're more likely to. I also recommend the student athlete expands his or her list, like I said, by at least 5. If all of these spring sport athletes stay for a 5th year over the next 4 years, there could be a lot less playing time at the schools a student athlete thought were the perfect fit 3 weeks ago. So they need more options on their list. And I'll talk more about creating that list in a minute. 2, student athletes can follow teams of interest and their players on social media. TikTok is a really popular one right now, and you can learn a lot about a team and their personality through that. Obviously, Instagram, Snapchat, if you can follow some of the players there, of course, Facebook and Twitter. There's really a lot to be learned about team dynamics through these outlets. This also means that student athletes have to be even more responsible on social media than ever before, because coaches are on social media now more than they've ever been. Student athletes should only be posting appropriate and positive messages and pictures about themselves and any other student athletes that are not controversial. They should all be positive. And of course, they should never post anything about their recruiting interests or anyone else's. Since there are no in-person visits right now, student athletes can get online and see a good virtual tour of their school of interest. Some coaches are even offering Zoom calls for their recruits to meet with student athletes, so the recruits can get even more personal opportunity to get to know the team. Coaches in Division I and II can't set that up for recruits, but recruits can reach out to student athletes and ask them to virtually connect, whether by video or even just chatting. It's a bold move and it requires some confidence out of a high school recruit, but if recruits can interact with current student athletes at schools of interest, they really will learn a lot. So I highly recommend that. Student athletes can and should email coaches to express their interest starting as early as their freshman year. That's when it's permissible for recruits to electronically reach out to a coach. There are different rules in each division about when a coach can fully engage in that email exchange, but at the least, it's important to get on a coach's radar as early as possible. Now, if a relationship has already been established with a coach, the student athlete should definitely check in. Coaches are just sitting around waiting for an email to ping right now. Be that ping. Ask to chat. Ask how all of this is impacting the coach's life. Remember, coaches are people too. And if you're reaching out for the first time, I'll talk a little bit more about what your email should say in a minute. Lastly, this is what you can do now. Since student athletes can't go visit schools right now and they're spending less time in the car traveling to practice in school, I recommend using that time to get ahead on SAT studying, ACT studying, get a jump start on that essay writing. So when student athletes create their list, and this is not so different in the time that we're in now from the time that we were 3 weeks ago, but that list, I recommend it's very broad. And now I think it needs to be even broader, especially because of two things. One, there's potentially less roster spots available on the teams that a student athlete might have been interested in before. And two, with the lack of competitions happening right now, coaches are not getting the opportunity to see borderline recruits compete. A borderline recruit is one whose talent is on the bubble for that respective program. It's less likely for coaches to take a risk if they have some fifth-year players waiting in the wings. So bottom line, student athletes need to cover their bases, put a lot of schools on their list, and one of my most important recruiting tips when making the list is to consider, what if the student athlete experiences a career-ending injury? Are these schools on the list ones where they will still be happy completing their education? So if a student athlete is contacting a coach for the first time, here are some tips. First, don't sit back and wait for a dream coach or any coach to make the first contact, especially in this time when we've all been relegated to virtual communication. Send an email with the following components. And no, student athletes do not need to wait until they have a resume or a professionally made profile ready. Despite what all the big recruiting companies say, this is not a necessity. Send the following information now in just a simple email template. First, start with an opening that shows that the student athlete has researched the program. Your program seems really great because ... Then tell the coach why the academic and athletic profile is a match. The student athlete should not be shy here. Include the best club and high school athletic highlights and pertinent academic stats, your SAT, ACT, GPA, curriculum track, whether it's AP, IB, honors, what have you. Ordinarily, I tell recruits to include their competition schedule here, but with everything canceled for the foreseeable future, it's no longer relevant. So instead, just include your coaches' names and numbers, a minimum of 2 coaches that know the student athlete best and can attest to his or her character. And lastly, attach a video. This also does not have to be professionally made, does not have to be perfect. As a coach, I don't want to see a recruit's best stuff. I want to see what you look like on an average day so I know what I'm going to be working with and what I can build off of. If the coach doesn't see what they're looking for, or if a family's amateur videography just isn't cutting it, they'll ask for additional footage. And lastly, this is the most important part, be persistent. If the student athlete doesn't hear back in 5 days, he or she needs to resend the email. If there's no response in another 5 days, call. Keep trying, especially if the research indicates that the student athlete's profile matches the coach's typical recruit. Even though coaches are not out and about, it doesn't mean they can't miss an email, so stay persistent. In my opinion, every coach should provide at least a response explaining why a student athlete is not recruitable, instead of taking the easy way out and ignoring an email. Don't let the coach have the easy way out. Also, just a reminder for parents here, don't send emails, texts, or make calls on your child's behalf, especially now when coaches know student athletes are home, they're not too busy to be able to do it themselves. If the student athlete does get the opportunity to meet virtually with a coach or a team, here are some tips. First of all, recognize that this is a mutual assessment, as in the coach or the team is assessing the student athlete at the same time the student athlete is assessing them. They might not get the chance to assess in person, so this could be it. Although, side note, I do think 2021 recruits should try to get in for a physical visit in the fall if they weren't able to do it before the pandemic. Of course, that will
Sorry, guys. Amy, can you still? I couldn't hear you for a second. Can you guys still hear Amy? I think a few questions are coming in. No sound. Okay.
am I
Yep, you're back. You're back. Thank you guys for being patient. No, you're guys. She's right back. Thanks, Amy.
Yep. Yep. Let me get my screen up. There it is. All right, so I'll start back at the top of the slide. Sorry about that. I just got kicked off for a minute. If a student athlete does get the opportunity to meet virtually with a coach or a team, here's some tips. First of all, recognize that this is a mutual assessment, as in the coach or the team is assessing the student athlete at the same time the student athlete is assessing them. They might not get the chance to assess in person, so this could be it. Although, side note, I do think 2021 recruits should get in for a physical visit in the fall. Of course, that will be dependent on how the pandemic ensues and whether or not the recruiting ban is lifted. But if student athletes do all of this work now, the amount of visits they need to take in the fall could be reduced. So that'll help expedite decision making then. So in meeting with the coach, the student athlete needs to be prepared, have their questions planned, practice their responses beforehand. They need to be engaged, which means expressing genuine interest in the program, and be thankful for the coach's time, especially in light of the current situation. And parents, you can help your child to be prepared for the meetings, but beyond the preparation phase, I strongly encourage you to step back and let your child take the lead. Your job is to lead your child to lead. So just to reiterate what that means, here's some common missteps parents take regarding team and coach meetings. First of all, parents, don't assume you're invited to the virtual meeting. Are invited. Your child, you think the here and questions that your child can ask him in situations. And let's take a quick look at what a coach will be assessing during this meeting and throughout the entire recruiting process. First and foremost, there are 3 factors a coach must check off in order to confirm a student athlete's recruitability, and that's their curriculum rigor and their grades, their SAT and their ACT score has to meet their standards, their school standards, and finances. And then beyond initial recruitability, this is just a little personal insight into what I look for in a recruit. I'll start with the little things and then build up to the most important. So you'll see that maturity composes a piece of a perfect recruit pie for me. Going away to college and being away from home is a lot to manage. The more mature and flexible you are, the easier it is, and the easier my job is, because then I can really focus on developing your athletics. Next is the student athlete's genuine interest in my program. You heard me say that a second ago as well. That's something that's very palpable when I talk to recruits and important to me, so I know I'm not wasting my time. It's also an ego thing for coaches, myself included. I want my recruits to want me, and I want them to want my team. The third biggest piece of the pie is what I call fire, fire, fire. And what this is me asking, does this recruit have what it takes to rise up in big competitions when we're under significant duress? Will this recruit rise above it all and pull out a win? And can this recruit lead others to do the same? The second biggest piece for me is whether or not the recruit's a team player. Is the recruit a selfless human being? To put it another way, training and traveling day in and day out with a group of people in college can be taxing for some. Others flourish and they're able to lift their teammates up while they themselves are reaching new heights. I try to stay away from the players who only think about themselves and consequently bring others down with them. And when I'm considering which recruit to offer a spot on my team, the main decision-making factor is coachability. And I break coachability up into effort and attitude, which I'll explain in a second. So this is my favorite picture. But I believe that effort and attitude are really the only two things that a student athlete can control. One can control how hard he or she works at a conditioning session. They can control the response to a referee making calls against you. One cannot control whether a coach offers a recruit a spot or starts their student athlete, nor is an opponent's performance inevitable. So when student athletes start recognizing their habits and attitude areas, are they the type of knows when the coach isn't looking so they don't have to sprint as hard in that particular moment, type of teammate who rolls his or her eyes behind the coach's back? If these are habits a student athlete can relate to, it's time to make the change, and make the change so that the student athlete can better leverage themselves to appeal to coaches. And then one of the last tips I'll give you today is how to assess a coach through the recruiting process. And these are just some important considerations that can be asked, whether on a phone call, in a virtual meeting, or just talking to current players. So number one, will the student athlete be working with the head or the assistant coach? Being relegated to one or another is common in larger sports. So it's important to be aware of who the student athlete will be working with primarily, and make sure that there's a conversation with that particular coach. Number two, I think it's important to understand whether the overall personality of the coach seems to be a good fit for the recruit's personality, and how the coach's demeanor may impact the recruit during practice and competitions. So in order to fully explore this, it's important for the recruit to have some self-awareness into their own personality strengths and weaknesses and needs. And this is a service I do provide to the student athletes that I work with, some self-assessments. Number three, it's important to assess the coach's overall knowledge of the sport, and this information should become obvious throughout a conversation or by researching a coach's history and past success. It's also important to assess the coach's ability to build positive team culture. My experience has proven that the teams with the most positive team culture and the healthiest environment tend to be the most successful and the most supportive of a player's personal development over time. Which brings us to the fifth point, which is how that coach really helps to develop his or her players into stronger players and better people, and ultimately confident, productive adults. It's important to understand whether or not the coach is just interested in you as a player, or are they interested in you as a person. And lastly, and especially relevant at this time of economic uncertainty, is how long will the coach likely be in the position? This information might not be readily shared during a virtual meeting with the coach, but should be in consideration nonetheless. There's a lot more to learn about the recruiting process. I highly suggest student athletes enlist the help of an experienced recruiting advisor. I personally don't recommend hiring any big name recruiting companies that are out there. They tend to be mail order matching systems where by paying money, the recruit gets in their system and is matched with the coaches that the company works with. I can tell you, in 20 years of coaching, I never took a recruit from a big recruiting company, despite the amount of spam emails I received from them. So here are the things families should consider when hiring somebody. You would want to hire somebody that has an individualized approach and really gets to know the student athlete as a person, has an independent affiliation, again, isn't associated with any big companies that may have other interests at heart. They should have academic and athletic knowledge to best guide the student athlete, and they should be a certified and experienced coach. And I say certified because I think that when mentoring student athletes, there is a professional side to that does require some professional training. So to sum it up, as a student athlete recruiting advisor, I would be remiss if I didn't leave you with the following message. Academics should always be the priority for student athletes of all ages. This pandemic has shown us that things can change in the blink of an eye, so you want to put yourself in a position where you can thrive as both a student and an athlete at the institution that you choose. Plus, the reality is that only 2% of collegiate student athletes go pro in sports. So I'm definitely not encouraging you to give up your sport in light of these challenging times, because being a student athlete provides so many intangible benefits to a student athlete's personal development and carries a lot of weight when interviewing for jobs. I'm merely saying that staying academically focused is crucial when considering our collegiate and career future. I do blog quite a bit about that, and my blog link is here if anyone wants it, and I'll forward that out after the webinar as well to everyone's emails. But what can you do next? If you'd like to consult with me, I am happy to provide everyone on this call with a free 15-minute consultation and see how I can help you in the future or help you during that time as well. And thank you so much for being here today. I really enjoyed sharing my experiences with you. And again, please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any other questions.
Amy, thank you so much. We had really great questions coming. I'm going to ask you a few of them in a second, but I want to thank you first and foremost. Please, everyone, note the email address and the phone number. I know Amy wants you to be in touch with her to kind of further this conversation about athletic recruiting. Also, my website is Strategic Admissions Advice. We'll be sending you the recording. Please don't fret about that. You will get this in via email shortly. But in the interim, I wanted to ask a quick question, Amy, because I'm not sure I can answer this. All right.
Yep.
Many of the people online were parents of 2021 athletes. There were some 2022s, there were some 2023s, but overwhelmingly it was 2020 or current juniors. There were a few seniors. There were a couple of 2020s as well. Great question. If 2021 students receive pass-fail grades for second semester, which we know is going to be pervasive.
You're frozen again.
Can you hear me at least? Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Amy?
Yeah, there you are. I just heard that they're overwhelmingly 2021s.
Yes, they're over 2021s.
Yeah.
If students receive a pass-fail grade for second semester 2020, how do you think this is going to affect NCAA eligibility?
I think Amy's frozen.
Okay. All right, guys, thank you so much. We're going to
There she is.
There you are.
I'm back.
You're back. Did you hear the question?
If they receive a pass-fail grade for the second semester senior year?
No, this year, because so many students, given the pandemic, going to receive pass-fail grades. How do you think that's going to affect eligibility, but also recruiting?
So you're asking about high school student athletes affecting their eligibility for the future in college?
Correct.
I wouldn't think it would affect anything, especially because so many folks are receiving pass-fail grades right now. I mean, that's where a lot of schools are going. So I wouldn't think it would affect anything in the recruiting scene or the admissions scene for that matter. Would you agree, Shereem?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think something that you said that was key earlier was that I think people have to broaden their list a little bit more, given the fact that athletics there's still so much uncertainty. Students will be receiving pass-failed. How do you deal with that on the academic end, first and foremost? How do admissions officers evaluate schools that will be test optional, was another question someone asked. So someone asked about what are schools going to do about NCAA eligibility if a school has now become test optional for the next 1, 2, or 3 years? For instance, Boston University will be test optional for next year, Case Western next year.
Yep.
Tufts will be for 3 years,
yep.
Right? So how is that going to affect it? I think the only answer to say is I think that's a moving target. We're not sure because I think first and foremost, athletic programs have to deal with the now. They have to deal with their current college kids and see how many of them are going to leave and how that's going to affect them going forward. But we're in uncharted territory here, and I would tend to think that, as you said, we're all going through it. There will be a sense of compassion. The NCAA has not kind of made a sweeping, broad statement about how they're going to handle this, but I do think it will be uniform once everything settles down. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I don't see any of these trends that are happening with the SAT, with grading or any of that affect recruiting in any way whatsoever.
Correct. I agree. There were several
besides
more.
The fact, I was just going to add, sorry, I was just going to add, besides the fact that a student athlete who might not have been very appealing to a coach prior to this because their SAT score might have been lower, now that at some schools they are going test optional, these student athletes might want to check back in with the coach and say, hey, since we're test optional now, what are my chances?
Right.
And so there's more of an option for them to get into some schools perhaps that they weren't going to, the coach wasn't able to work with them prior to.
There was a specific baseball question that I'm going to answer just because I've thought about it for my own son, who's actually a baseball recruit. So someone asked, my son's a 2021 high school student, but because of COVID-19, we're not certain 100% sure yet if they're going to be able to go to showcases this summer, because we don't know if we're all going to be playing any sports in the near future. And how does that impact recruiting? The first thing I could say is I think it's important that we think positively that it will happen. And if it doesn't, I think you made great points, Amy, of being in touch with the coaches for the schools that you're kind of targeting. But then my tip would be to go to those coaches' camps. Those camps that'll be happening in the fall at their colleges may be opportunities for your child to get in front of them. So I tend to think that reaching out to them now, planting the seed, crossing our fingers that there's opportunities over the summer to showcase, but definitely going to the fall camps can generate some momentum. But you're absolutely right. If they're going into their senior year next year, they're on the clock with this. And I think that schools will start releasing how they're going to handle this, because it's going to be, like I said, pervasive for a lot of people.
And let me just add a little addendum to that, or a disclaimer. Do your research on which camps you go to and which showcases you attend, okay? Because I know a lot of coaches that run camps and it's just a moneymaker for them. So you might think you're going to showcase your stuff to the coach of whatever school you're interested in, but in fact, the coach might not even be there and might not even be interested in the recruits that are there. So definitely do your research, have a conversation. Will your child be playing in front of the coach during this camp? And then same thing for the showcases. I mean, you might get a flyer in the mail saying, this coach is interested in you and they want you to attend a showcase. But unless you've actually heard from a coach saying, I am interested in you, please come, don't trust a flyer. Getting a flyer in the mail is really just them fishing for dollars, in my opinion. So just be real careful with that.
Understood. There's another great question. What if students were counting on this semester to raise their GPA, but now classes are pass or fail, or pass or non-pass, whatever, satisfactory? That's going to be, again, we cannot put a stamp on what that's going to be for your particular school, for how colleges handle it. I think everyone will be sensitive to it, knowing the fact that we're all going through it. And if they were counting on the semester to raise their grades, in some ways this could be a blessing in disguise, that they'll be judged on what they had as of January, whenever the semester began, and whatever happens now, they can go into their senior year or the next year a little bit more confident. Okay, now I'm ready to grab the bull by the horn. So there's going to be a lot of extra explanation letters going out to colleges over the next several years, I think, given this pandemic. But I don't want to give a broad brush statement on what can happen versus I think it's an individual one case-by-case basis.
And things like that really could be opportunities for student athletes too.
I agree wholeheartedly. Again, please, Bryant collegecoaching.com is Amy. I am Strategic Admissions Advice. We really appreciate you guys for being on this webinar. Thank you for staying with us during some of the audio blips, but we'll be sending out the recording to everyone and we'll be in touch. And we hope everyone is staying safe, and we'll be in touch. Thank you guys. Have a great evening.